Hey yo, it's artificial.
It's artificial.
Hey yo, it's time for the show.
Time for the what?
Hey yo, it's artificial. Hey yo,
It's time for the show.
check the credentials, just the initials, hit like a missile.
To spark the mental, the illest audio, hottest visuals.
We elevate the culture with facts while bridging the gaps. Off the rip though, it's artificial. What's good, people? It's your boy Z, the Golden Era.
Yo, I gotta cut you off, man. My name is Augie, dog.
What is your name, Army? What the heck?
Yo, I'm Augie Ray, man. I'm just
Too
messing
much
with
energy.
You. Go ahead. But we live from Hype Studios, LA, man. We about to bring it down, man. This is the 90's show. So with that in mind,
No. It's that 90's show.
That 90's show. I like that. Okay, so that 90's show. Let's talk about right now in hip hop culture. Is hip hop even relevant? I mean, 90s.
Is it even hip hop? Is that what you're saying?
I call it hip hop. You know what I mean?
Hip-hop, okay.
Yeah, but I'm not trying to, go in on the generation and act like this, But what I'm trying to say is that 90's had the golden age of hip hop.
Yeah,
right.
Absolutely.
And so, what kind of like for you lived in the 90's. I grew up in the 90's. What was your perspective on the 90's, man? Tell me a little bit about that.
I mean, I think it was dope, man. I mean, it was everything to me that hip hop is all about. And
what is hip hop about?
I think what you're saying is that maybe it's lost its way a little bit. Yeah.
And what is hip hop about for you?
I just think that to me, it's more than just the art form of rapping, or we've talked about getting the bag or whatever before, but really, I think there's a culture to it. There was a structure to it, and that's kind of been fragmented and dissipated. Like if you look at early on, started in the 70s through the Universal Zulu Nation, but there was a framework put to hip hop as cornerstones of hip hop. So there was basically DJing, there was graffiti, there was MCing, and there was b-boying, and there was knowledge. And each one of those represented kind of the overall mind, spirit, and body, essentially. So, like, if you look at DJing, that was the auditorial function. If you look at MCing, that was the verbalization. If you look at graffiti, that was the visual, okay? And knowledge of self was about uplifting the culture itself. It was about knowing about yourself, knowing about your history, especially for people of color. And then it was about uplifting people that were disadvantaged, and it was kind of having social kind of thoughts and how you're going to support the culture moving forward. That's all lost, So I think each one of those art forms still exists, but at the end of the day, nobody's looking at it from that perspective. So for me, it's a culture. That's what I'm saying.
But with that in mind, I mean, I feel like hip hop was based on the understanding that structure needed to be broken at a certain time, right? And so during the time of like the 80's going into the 90's, hip hop wasn't considered popular in the 80's. Like it was not like something that everybody wanted to be a part. And like you had the rise of like Def Jam, and a lot of people were like, what is this music? Where is this coming from? And then it became socially acceptable. But I felt like the rebellion in that, and as we see today with some of the artists or whatever, where, there's a balance. I mean, I think breaking barriers and I think hip hop's base was, the art of sampling or whatnot, and influenced by other music and kind of making a melting pot of sound or whatever. I think we're seeing that a lot today, but as far as, like structure goes, I feel like a lot of the structure has also limited a lot of artists in the 90's. A lot of great artists that we've never even heard of that never
That's
got
industry structure, though. I think that's different. I'm talking about being unified and doing it for the right reasons. Like, other than just having an opportunity because you have an internet connection and you can produce music and you can put it out and you can become a star and
But
make
do you
money.
feel like there has to be an underground rap culture right now? I mean, right now, when we talk about the industry, I mean, the industry is when the 90's came along, that's when the industry affected hip hop, in my opinion. We started seeing guys go from the underground to the mainstream, and they, the money started to fuel a lot of things, and that's turned into a cancer today.
But it was also about the craft. So the 90s was really big on lyricism, right? So it was all about the craft. And if you look at the MCs of the 90s, all of the big MCs, they didn't sound alike. They were totally different. They were all like superheroes in their own right. Like you could go from Biggie to Method Man to Tupac, all very different people, all very different influences on the culture overall. But I think where we're at today, and I'm with you, push the boundaries, break rules. I'm with that. But at the end of the day, you've got a sound now that kind of, a lot of it all sounds like it's all blended together. I mean, there's people that stand out and stand above the rest, but there is a certain style that all blends together. And I think where in the 90s, it was very clear on what those different things were. There was gangster rap, there was backpack, as we would call it back then, which was the more lyrical, kind of like native tongue style. There was, more like party rap or whatever, like turn up music.
But did that get boring after a while? I mean,
I don't think it got boring. I think it had its own lanes. What I think is that it's all flattened out into one sound. And I don't know if that's a better sound. It's the new sound. It's the sound. I can't hate on it though. Like, I mean, I bump a lot of new stuff that has that kind of singy, songy sound, or auto-tune based, I guess. But if you look at it, it's like pop, hip hop singing with gangster rap lyrics, with drug culture, and it's kid rappers. Remember what I said before? Like, there's no kid rappers anymore because all the rappers are kids. Like
totally.
back in the day, like it was a different thing. You know? There was like,
Yeah, but is it possible that you could be, that old geezer, sitting on the couch, eating your popcorn?
Me?
Yeah, well, I'm saying you're eating your popcorn
what are you saying?
and you're looking at these
I
little
don't eat
kids.
popcorn, bro.
Well, you're looking at these kids and you're like, yo, okay, these kids, they don't understand, what this is. Is it really hip hop though? That's where it comes down to. Or is this a new generation of music that we're hearing?
It's the evolution of hip hop. But
You think?
it's not the same, but you can't be like trapped in a time capsule thinking it only has to be one way. I mean, I'd like bars. You have to find bars. Like it's not prominent in music today. There are plenty of people. Obviously, we've seen some people get some nods.
Yeah.
We saw a young rapper who has bars. YBN Corday's up for 2 NAMI nominations. I support.
You think
him.
that's deserved?
I don't think that was the album. Like, I think that it's his first album after like some mixtapes and collab mixtapes, like with his crew. But
He's gonna have an album that's probably gonna,
absolutely,
yeah,
absolutely.
Okay.
I mean, I was waiting for like that Dre production stuff, Like,
Yeah.
I think he's the future, right? I think he's dope. But I think it might be premature. But I don't want to take anything away from him. He's hardworking. He does all the right things. So
Yeah.
and he's been doing it a long time. You can go back and see videos of him when he was much younger, spitting bars. So I give him credit, but I mean, I think there's some real raw shit that was left out. Like I told you before, I think Schoolboy Q Crash Talk should have been like up for album of the year. I think that's a dope ass album. Like kind of got snubbed. I don't know.
Snubbed it up. Yeah, I mean, for me, I miss the ciphers in the 90s, man. The 90s to me was, even though I was, still dancing in my diapers, or whatever, I was, getting ready to
You were crapping in your diaper.
yeah, I mean, but I was getting ready to hop into, like the 2000s. I was born in 1990, but getting into 2000s, I felt like, the 90s hip hop and Fresh Prince of Bel-Air, Martin, Family Matters, for all y'all that know what that is, those things gave me a great impression to where I am today, and I bring up ciphers because I felt like it was freedom of expression. And that's how I felt like hip hop has always been, you know what I mean? And so when I'm looking at these new cats, I'm like, that's the freedom of expression. I don't know if I'm going to coin what they're doing as hip hop, you know what I mean? Like it's an evolution. I don't know, but it's another form.
Can you change a foundational element? Like, just take freestyling, for example. Freestyling, to me, in my era, means off the top of the dome. It does no pre-writtens. You don't pull your phone out. It's not your best pre-written verse. It's evolved into something else. Should we have called it a freestyle? Or it's like a freestyle because it's fun? Or like it's, it's impromptu to some degree, but it's not freestyle, right?
Yeah.
So I've always been really hardline on that.
Trigger fingers turn into Twitter fingers, right? I mean,
Well, I'm just saying, like, how can you say a written's a freestyle? It's not.
Yeah.
Right. So those are the kinds of things that have changed, and I think to some degree, you got to try to support the culture and elevate it. And I mean, a lot of these people that are involved in the culture with it being fragmented, like I was saying, those elements, all those elements still exist. They're just not connected. And there are people that practice it, but you know, b-boyism is like its own thing. DJing is its own thing. It's an international thing, right?
Yeah.
Like graffiti is its own thing. Everyone is connected to hip hop, but are they really living and breathing it? You know what I mean? Like my introduction to hip hop was not through music. It was actually through breakdancing.
Okay.
So
You was pop locking and stuff.
I was doing it all.
Doing
I actually really hurt myself when I was about like 7 or 8 years old. I tried to do a suicide on the pavement, and that's basically a flip onto your lower back. And
Jeez. It was like a belly
yeah,
dive onto your back.
wasn't good. I was so embarrassed. Like,
Yeah.
but hey, you got to take chances, man. Right? Like, so, yeah, that was my introduction to it. But like Marc Lo, you know, I know when we talked to him, he said that he had an older brother. You know, I had an older brother. He used to take me to the record store. Like, we go across town on the Muni bus to the record store, and I somehow started getting hip hop records. You know, and
Yeah.
the rest was history. You know, but. I just think that if you ask a lot of these people that are doing music today, and I'm not trying to single any specific person out, but they don't even know they couldn't name the elements of hip hop, you know, but they're performing hip hop. They're calling themselves rappers or MCs, artists, and they're making money off of it, right?
Yeah.
So like that's I take issue with that.
Yeah.
Like, you know, do you know who founded it? Do you know what the breaks were? Like, what do you know about hip hop for real? Like where it came from? And I think that's an element that's missing, is that, you know, the young culture needs to pay homage to what came before them.
Okay, so as of the 90s, we could look at this as, you know, did the 90s define what today's culture is?
I think that the 90s are the most pivotal era. I mean, you obviously have the founding days, the pioneering days, but the 90s is the most dense decade of the highest quality hip hop to date. And I think everything that occurred then and all of these great artists that had, you know, these amazing careers throughout that decade are what everybody kind of draws from or pulls from. And it's also the standard that everyone holds people to. Like when you talk about the 90s and you talk about current hip hop, they bring up the Kendricks and the J. Coles, and when you talk about bars, you know. So I think that's really the litmus test, you know. That's where the bar set is on 90s hip hop.
Sounds good. Let's go.